So I wanted to do a video response for this week's blog topic because I feel like for me, when it comes to talking about social justice, it's easier for me to have those conversations out loud and in person than it is to do it through writing. I feel like I'm having more authentic conversations that way, and I feel like when it comes to talking about things like social justice, it's important that those conversations be authentic. And so I'm going to do a video response. I apologize in advance if it's kind of jumbled and all over the place. I'm just going to kind of start and see where I end up at the end of this. So the past couple weeks in class, we've been talking about social justice in online spaces, and we've been discussing whether it's possible to have constructive online conversations and whether it's possible to change someone's mind in an online space. And so I want to start off by saying that I think having constructive online discourse is totally possible, but I think that a couple things need to be happening in order for that conversation to be constructive. So first, simply put, I think that in order to have constructive online discourse, both sides need to be open-minded. And open-minded in the sense that both sides are willing to acknowledge and maybe play around with viewpoints that differ from their own. But also be willing to acknowledge that even if those viewpoints are different, they are still valid in their own way. So need to be open-minded and willing to listen to the opposite side. I also think that in order for online discourse to be constructive, people need to be willing to get feedback or constructive criticism on their opinions. I'm going to kind of talk about this in a little bit, but I think that sometimes when we put things online, we're not looking to get feedback on those opinions. So I think that in order for an online discussion to be constructive, we need to be open to getting feedback on our opinions. That being said, though, I think that there are factors that make having a constructive online discourse very difficult. One of them being the very fact that when you have a conversation online, you're not face-to-face with the person that you're talking to. And so I sometimes think that online discourse can be misconstrued because you can't see the other person's emotions. And so they're kind of hidden behind the text that you're typing. And so when you're in person, you're able to see how the other person is feeling based on their body language or based on the way that they're speaking or the way that they're reacting. So you can see maybe how passionate the person is about this topic or what they're really feeling about what you're saying. Whereas through text, I think the emotion gets lost. And so I think that is a barrier to having constructive online discourse. I also think that a lot of the time, people comment on social media and on the internet not looking for feedback on their opinions. I kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I think that in this age of social media where we're so connected all the time, we forget that when we post something, the rest of the world can see it. Social media kind of gives this illusion of privacy or this illusion of anonymity. And so I think we get kind of caught up in that. And so we maybe post things that we normally wouldn't say in person, just to get our opinions out there. And I think that we're not always looking to get feedback on those opinions. And so I think that is also a barrier to having constructive online discourse, because if you're not looking to get feedback or constructive criticism on your opinions, you just wanted to get your opinion out there, then oftentimes I think people can be defensive when people do respond, because they weren't looking for that in the first place. And when we get defensive of our opinions, that kind of prohibits, I think, constructive conversations, because we're not being open-minded to alternative ways of thinking. I also think that once a conversation becomes racist or sexist or classist or homophobic or transphobic or oppressive in any way, that it can no longer be a constructive online conversation, kind of for several reasons. So first, I recognize that people are entitled to their opinions. But I think that once a conversation becomes oppressive, then it is no longer opinion against opinion, but it has now become a power dynamic in which a person or one side of the argument is asserting their privilege over groups of people. And so I don't think constructive online discourse is possible at that point, because now certain groups of people are being oppressed, and the space itself is no longer safe for certain groups of people. So I don't think constructive online discourse is possible in that way. I also think that when the conversation becomes oppressive, I think we can do our best to maybe try and educate the person on why their viewpoints are oppressive, but ultimately I think the work needs to be done internally within that person. And so I don't think the conversation can be constructive anymore, because it's up to that person to maybe reflect on the opinions that they have, and maybe do some own deconstructing within themselves. So kind of to sum up, I think that it is very possible to have a constructive online conversation, but I think that there are factors that make it very difficult to do. I also want to touch on another topic that we've been talking about in class, and this is the idea of whether teachers should speak out against social justice issues and oppression online, or is it better to maybe remain neutral on the topic and kind of preserve a neutral teacher identity. And so I've talked about this in class, very passionate about this topic, so I just wanted to talk about it again. I think that teachers definitely have a responsibility to speak out against social justice issues and oppression online, but not just online, in any sort of space. I think, for one, if we don't speak out against oppression or social justice issues, and we choose to remain neutral to kind of preserve our image, then our silence can be deemed as approval or acceptance of that oppression. And I think that's just as bad as saying those things in the first place ourselves. I also think that, we talk a lot about being an ally for our students within the Faculty of Education. That's kind of a buzzword, and, we all say that we're an ally for our students, but I think there's a difference in saying you're an ally, and actually being an ally. To me, being an ally means that you're actually willing to do the work to be an ally. It's not enough to say that you're an ally. And so, part of being an ally is standing up against oppression and social justice issues when you see or hear them. That's part of the work of being an ally. I think being an ally also means, recognizing that every student in your classroom is unique. It's not enough to say that you don't see race, you don't see gender, you don't see sexuality, you don't see any of those labels, but that you only see the student that steps inside of the classroom. You only see the person. I think that way of thinking is problematic, especially if you consider yourself an ally, because when you say that you don't see race or gender or sexuality or any other identity category, then you're actually invalidating people's identities and their experiences. And I think that we need to recognize that every student is unique, because those identity categories have made the student who they are. And we need to be able to give the student the resources and the learning opportunities, the specific resources and learning opportunities that they need to be successful. And sometimes those are different for every individual student because of those identity categories. So it's not enough to just ignore them and pretend that they're not there. I think that being an ally also means, shutting down offensive conversations when you see and hear them both online and in person. I think it means advocating for student rights. I think it means teaching about treaty education, teaching about gender and sexuality, and not just saying that it doesn't fit in the curriculum and it's too hard to do. I think those are all acts of being an ally. I also think being an ally means that you are an ally all the time, even when there isn't a problem that maybe needs immediate attention. And so I consider myself an ally for my students, and one way that I show my allyship is on Twitter. I've talked about this in class, but on Twitter, I like to share articles relating to social justice and anti-oppressive education, to try and educate the people on Twitter about those issues. So, there's not a specific issue at hand that needs attention, but I still like to educate myself, but also try and educate others by posting those kinds of things. But I think most importantly, to be an ally means that you are willing to acknowledge and confront your own privilege on an ongoing basis. I don't think you can be an ally for oppressed groups if you don't understand how you inherently benefit from those very structures in society that work to oppress those groups of people that you are trying to be an ally for. So I think overall, in order to be an ally, you actually have to be willing to do the work of being an ally, and it's not enough to just say that you are an ally, and that teachers definitely need to speak out, and that's part of being an ally. So that's kind of everything that I wanted to say for this blog topic this week. But I would love to keep the conversation going. So if anyone has any comments, please let me know, and maybe we can keep this conversation going. I think that this topic is important to talk about, and I think that also talking about these kinds of issues make us better teachers. And so I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Anyways, that's all I have to say.